Tonight we have Bob Wright with Cruz and Associates with us, our financial advisor, as well as Dan Jackson with Wildan. And then on Zoom, if he's still with us, we have Ryan Bowman with Friday Firm. And we're here to talk about moving forward with an additional bond for our waterworks. As you know, we've had some significant increases in that project over the past 2 years. We go back and we look at the project, and we've always kind of broken that down in our transmission mains, our intake, our water treatment plant, and then our finished water mains. And back in 2017, when we were designing these all the way through 2019, we were in good shape when we passed the original bond. But over time, no one knew what the impact of COVID was going to have, and it has substantially increased our cost. And that's not the only thing. We've also, in our planning originally, we thought we would be able to float and sink every one of the crossings of Lake Hamilton, and that's not able to be done through Entergy. Big Mazarn is a big one. We were not able to cut Big Mazarn. We actually have to bore under it to meet their requirements, and that added a little over $10 million to that project. But when we look at the raw water transmission mains, when we started was about 37 million. Today that's 46.2. The intake, 13.5. It was 19.3. The wastewater treatment plant, 24 million. Now we're looking at 38. The finished water main was 17 million when we started, and with piping, it's 26.7. We've got some contingency built into this. But when you look at all of these things coming together, we're not going to have enough money to finish the plant. We're not going to have enough money to do the potable lines. So if we plan on finishing this project that we started, it is going to take another letting or another bond. We've looked at different ways on how we could fund that. It's going to be about $2 in the base rate, effective January 1st of 2023, coming back with another $2 in November 1st of 2023. Both of those have to happen within the same year due to our recent Act 605. Originally we were hoping to do $2 and $2 in 23, and $2 in 24, but Act 605 prevents us from doing so. The only way you can do that over a 2-year period based on Act 605 is if your increase is over 50% of the current rate. So I do want to say that we are very cognizant of our rates, and we've always tried to keep those as low as we can. And I think that's shown in the fact that our today's rate for water, we are within the 16th to 17th lowest percentile in the entire state. When you add in these 2 rate increases of January and November of $4 for the year, we will still be in the 25th, the lowest quarter of water rates in the entire state. And those are numbers that are published by the Arkansas Natural Resources that tracks over 650 utilities throughout the state. So, nobody wants to bring in rate increases any more than I do. I do not, envy that we have to do this, but we have to get this plant built. Now, I've heard in the community, and so have you, that we're building a plant that's going to stretch out for another generation or two. Well, that is true. But what we lose sight of is we need this water today and tomorrow. We need it right now. It just so happens that as you build a plant, it will take us out that amount of time. This plant ought to take us out another 40 to 45 years before we need to look at another, based on our growth estimates, and what we're seeing has been very true. But this past summer, we again are exceeding well over 20 million gallons a day in our production. We cannot depend on the weather, on whether we will have water for tomorrow. And I'm concerned about, we've had great growth over the past couple of years in our business community. And if we don't do something and protect our ability to provide the water, we're going to have to make some even harder decisions than what we are tonight. So I'll lead in with that. I don't really know which way to turn this over. I think I'll turn it over to Bob to start and talk about the bond itself, and then Mr. Jackson will come up and talk a little bit about his rate structure to help us accommodate this. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Burrow. I handed out prior to the meeting some numbers. This is the same type of format that we've gone through in the past. I will say, and Leanne with Stevens, your underwriter, she is here as well, that we've experienced the exact same thing that you're going through right now, cost overruns. We're getting called, we're seeing projects to where we fund something, and at the end of the day, we have to come back in and fund a gap. I've had USDA call me and it's like, hey, go talk to X community. They've got a shortfall. We can't get the funding in time. Go ahead and handle that. So we're seeing this on a consistent basis. It's a shame. It's a big number that you're looking at right here, but it's a big project. Those that were on the board when in this watch-off project even predates my 11, 12 years working with the city. As long as y'all been looking at this, as Mr. Burrow said, a generational supply of water, we kind of brought up the fact of, you don't want things that are going on in Texas and New Mexico in the Southwest. And now you look out west where there is a true deficit of water. That's not going to be a problem here in Hot Springs. But the unfortunate basis is we've got to try to fund this gap to finish out the project. So we've been working with the city and with Dan that he'll come up and kind of go through the proposed rate study that we're trying to get this done for you. If you'll flip through this just quickly, on first page, just a summary of the transaction, looking at $47.7 million. Not pricing this transaction until the latter part of December. We do need to close it here in 2022 because if we waited, your audit doesn't flow in until the middle part of 2023. And that kind of puts a risk for increased cost of the project, increased borrowing cost. So that's why we're here for you tonight to explain it, and we'll be back in December when we actually get the bonds sold and locked in. We have gone through and confirmed with Build America, the bond insurance company, that they have approved the credit again for a AA rated credit, so it brings your borrowing costs down. And they have approved the project for their Green Star initiative that shows that we had on your prior issue, but it shows the impact environmentally of what the project you're doing. The last thing here, and I'll be working with Leanne on this as well, a call date of October 2032. I'm trying to be conservative on the numbers we're showing you here tonight. We will certainly strive to bring that redemption date lesser than 10 years. We don't want you to be just stuck with no options on this deal. So if we can bring it in 5, 6, 7 years as we've done traditionally on your other debt, that's what we'll look to do. The next page, and if you've seen on TV, you know what interest rates are doing. And this is just since 2021, January of 21. But you can see, earlier part of this year, interest rates really took off with the Fed action, what's going on in the economy. So we're kind of chasing that. So that's another reason why we do want to get into the market, get these bonds and these rates locked in so that it fits the rate study, fits the budget, and sets that, and then try to put in some provisions that if rates do turn around, if the Fed moves too fast and too much, puts us into a recession, if rates come back down, have the opportunity to come in and lower the, refinance and lower the rates at some point as we've done for you in the past. Next page, aggregate debt service. This is on the water system itself, and we've listed each one individually. The MAWA debt is subordinate on the waterfall provision as far as the credit. That MAWA loan is out there. The 2010 loan with ANRC, it is at 0% interest rate with a 1% servicing fee. It's a very good interest rate. However, with some of the change in administration there at ANRC, what they've done for us in the past as far as granting, and I'll get to it on the next page, or on the last page almost, but instead of granting that they will maintain their subordinate position, they've taken a different stance where it's actually forcing us to add that issue, and we have to refund that and pay it off. Otherwise, it's going to cost the city and the ratepayers a substantial amount. And we've gone back and forth with ANRC, and we're at the point now that we have to add that in.
And what is the amount of that?
I'm sorry?
Balance? What is the balance of that?
3.4 million approximately, and it goes out 11 years. So we're going to add that in to pay it off. It is a cost to the city to do that. It is a much lesser cost than if we left it out. You can see under the middle section, each individual loan, we labeled what the interest rate. You can see 3.66 on the 18 bonds, 3% on the 24. The big one in 2020 that started the project, 3.26 is your borrowing rate. And we came back in 21 on a refunding 1.84%. So you can see currently the system is set up very efficiently as far as your borrowing costs. So that impacts your ratepayers. Far right side, the annual principal and interest, the debt service, the mortgage on the system, and it's going to ramp up a little bit, and Dan will kind of cover that as far as the rate increase and how we structured this, but it gets to the point here in the next 2 or 3 years, it gets up to about $11.7 million principal and interest. That'd be the mortgage on your system. Next page, sources and uses. And this is just the various costs that go along with issuing the $47.7 million. And you can see we've broken it out to different purposes, the refunding of the 2010A, and then the new money portion. The new money will deposit $45 million into the construction account upon closing being December 29th. We've been in discussions with Matt, your engineer. He thinks that number, that $45 million, is conservative, that should certainly cover anything beyond here to cover the rest of this project. Thinks it's a little bit on the high side, but we don't want to have a shortfall yet again. So that's why we're depositing $45 million. Next page under pricing. And the thing to look at here, with the interest rates, if you'll look under the yield column, rates anywhere from 3.3 early out to 30 years, 5.05%. That certainly is a big difference from what you've seen on the last number of deals we've done for you. That's the current state of the market. I talked to Bill prior to the meeting, and it's something I'll get together with Leanne. I think on your overall budget, when you take a 30,000 foot view of your system, and you're going to get up to 11.7 million, and your rates will handle that. I think we can knock some years off of this transaction, shorten it up, and initial numbers looks like we can save millions on the bottom line on this financing. It's not in these numbers here today because we still have a month of market fluctuation, but I think when we come back to you in December, I think that will be the plan, and I'll show you kind of the difference of where we project today versus where we ultimately would end up. The next page, last page here, this does have on the bottom the yield statistics and the true interest cost down there. When you factor in the cost of issuance and such, 4.81%. So you can see we're substantially higher than all of your previous debt. That's just the factor of the market. But we've got the total principal interest on this transaction there in the middle, total P&I, along with your existing DS or existing principal and interest on your outstanding debt. That's where on the far right side you come over to your mortgage on the system, and that's where it comes into the 11.7 million. And then lastly, as this will transition into Dan's rate analysis, this is kind of a summary of how we look at it. We kind of flip-flopped. On the far right side is the 2021 audit, the actual audited results. And you can see there's 3 different ways of looking at this. In 2021, your maximum annual debt service was 8.6 million, so your coverage was 117%. It's pretty good for the amount of debt you have and the rates that you charge. The current year, because again, we kind of ramp up on your principal interest. The actual current year coverage in 2021 was 1.93 because your principal interest was only 5.2 million. And then there's one provision in the documents that we can look at what's the average of that, and that's a 1.34, your average principal interest over the life of all the debt. But then projecting out to the left, you can see that the maximum of 11.7 million, that doesn't kick in for 3 or 4 years. But if you looked at what the projected revenue available in 2023 would be 11.57 million versus debt of 11.7 3 years from now. So your coverage is basically 1-to-1. But based on the current year, that middle number, that's the number we're actually looking at and what we've traditionally done when we go out to the capital markets, 1.16%. In 24 is 1.16, and it starts ramping up a little bit further, and you get into the 120s and the 130s as you go forward. So your system, once you hit that 11.7 million annual mortgage on the system, the revenues, the growth in the system, and such like that gets you to a very healthy 120, 125, 130 coverage factor. So that's what we have presented to the bond insurance company. That's what we're working with Stevens on the structuring and such. We will, if the city approves, we would be back right there before the holidays, before Christmas, with the final results, looking to price on the 20th of December and closing on the 29th. So quite a bit kind of constricted there in a holiday 2-week period. But that's where we stand as far as the numbers. We can't control what's going on. The numbers that we provided to Dan as far as when he started working on his rate study, we've still fluctuated as far as where that rate is. So we think we've been conservative on what we provided him with what he's run as far as why he's recommending the $2 this year, $2 next year should cover all this. So we're confident in that unless something happens in the next 30 days that's unforeseen as far as the markets.
Any questions of Bob? Director
Yes, ma'am.
Garcia?
Thank you, Mayor. Bob, I want to make sure I understand what's reflected here on this last page.
Yes, ma'am.
On these projections from 2023 to 2032, those net revenues available for debt service, that amount includes this proposed rate increase?
Yes, ma'am.
And that of 2 and 2?
Yes, ma'am.
But, and that's the only numbers that were run. I mean, what is,
And Dan can explain it, I think, when he
Okay.
goes through his presentation.
Okay.
But the projection right now is just, to get this debt and get the coverage sufficient is to have that $2 that would be enacted now, the $2 next year. We, as Mr. Burrows said, we tried to phase that in. Act 605 basically says, no, you have to squeeze it all in 1 year. So that's why we're proposing November of 22, November of 23, the $2 rate increase. That fits within that 1 year to comply with the act. And then going forward, it's just projections as far as what the revenues and expenses would be versus the debt service, which would be set. So that's why we think on an ongoing basis, the debt service coverage will increase. A little bit thin on the margin right now, but we see that increasing.
and, but it'll be in Dan's presentation about the growth, because we're seeing additional connections and additional customers.
Yes, ma'am.
All the time, and that's included in his.
Yeah, this is, and his numbers will probably look a little bit different from what we've got here, but that last page is taken from what his rate study projections are, because that's how we presented to the bond insurance company and how we'll kind of present that to the investing public.
Now, if we were to issue bonds, this one is less than half of the last one that was issued in 2020. And so I didn't know if it really requires 2 companies to do that or one. And I just mentioned that for consideration.
Okay. And we'll continue to have that discussion. That's a
Thank
good-
you.
Good point. Dan, you wanna-
Any other questions? Bob, before you leave, I guess the refunding of the 210A at 3.125 million, you're saying that has no interest rate associated with it?
0% interest rate with a 1% servicing fee, so it's basically a 1% loan. And we're
But-
paying it off with,
5% money?
well, we're gonna pay it off the same or shorter than what it actually is right now. But it's still, you're gonna pay it off at probably mid-3 to 3.75 versus 1. It's not efficient.
Is there a value in paying it off from just right now?
From cash.
Yeah.
There certainly is value that you would save that interest. Right now, short-term interest rates versus what we've been in the last number of years where you're earning 0.3%. Right now, your short-term investments are probably earning, 1-year investments are earning 3.5%, 4%. So to take 3.4 million out of something earning 3.5 or 4% and paying off the 1%, right now actually doesn't make sense. 2 years ago, it probably did.
Well, I think we'd have to probably, just looking at the numbers, would have to borrow that money from the general fund into the water fund because its fund balance wouldn't
Well, that's what
accommodate that at this time.
That's kind of what I'm driving at as well. Just if there's another source of funds so we can limit the borrowing. I mean, you hate to, I understand what you're saying, that if we have the other funds invested at
Yeah.
a competitive current rate, then we're really just talking about the difference there.
And there were numerous discussions with ANRC, and historically, the person that was there that we would present this to, hey, we don't meet the requirements for ANRC to remain on a subordinate position, but you can see that's because we're phasing in the rate increase, and they certainly get there, and so they've approved that, and they approved it in 20 and 21 this time around, and I think part of it is Act 605, that we have to squeeze it all into 1 year, but on that last page on the coverage, we don't get up to that 120% on the maximum annual debt service, which is what the legal language is in the 2010 documents. We don't get there until 2027. So at this point, they would not waive that provision and remain in that subordinate position. It was going to force our hand on this 2020, not to get too deep in the weeds, but it would force our hand on the 2022 bonds to get on the same level with the 2010, but then we would be subordinate to all of the other public debt. And then you're talking subordinate debt of 45 million, that's going to add quite a bit of interest rate. So we looked at all the different scenarios, and there's no, from a number standpoint, no reason whatsoever to pay off the 2010. Since they would not relent and remain in their subordinate position, our hands are forced.
Well, the use of funds, is there a timing on the use of funds?
On the construction funds,
Yeah, for the new money?
3 years. 3 years. 85% of that you need to spend within 3 years.
So you would borrow 100% of it today, that would be used over a 3-year period of time?
On the construction, on the refunding, the day we close, they have waived, on the refunding side, they've waived a 90-day notice provision and said that the day we close on the 29th, we can pay off that debt. So at least the 2010A on day one is gone. No longer an
You're talking about
obligation.
the coverage ratio being 1.26, it takes years to get there. Of new money, how much money could be borrowed to maintain that coverage ratio?
You would, to get there based on maximum annual, you'd have to cut that, the new borrowing, instead of 45 million, you'd have to cut it significantly, as far as what this first funding would be, to get there. And then the risk is if rates continue to go up or the cost of this project continues to go up without allowing the engineers to lock it in within this, 2 or 3 year period, could far outweigh what we're trying to save on that small refunding. And we've looked at multiple scenarios, and we're not happy about it from this standpoint, from a number standpoint. The state is basically in the business to help ratepayers of the state of Arkansas. And we've explained to ANRC that this action is costing the ratepayers of Hot Springs. But even at that, we're at an impasse.
All right, thank you.
For the members of the board, Dan Jackson with Will Dan. Dan.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the board. I am Dan Jackson, and I've got with me Mr. Dan Lanning of Wildan also. We've had the privilege of being the city's water and wastewater rate consultants for, I believe it's 20 years now. So we've worked with you periodically over the years to develop long-term water and wastewater rate plans that will help you meet the increasing costs of providing water service, while at the same time, to the best extent possible, trying to minimize that impact on your ratepayers. We completed our last rate study for the city in 2021, early in 2021. And as we typically do, we recommended a long-term rate plan for the city to implement. Well, whenever you do a financial plan or a financial analysis, it's always subject to revision if there are any extraordinary events that occur. Well, I think that what Bob and Mr. Burrow have talked about has been pretty extraordinary. What you're seeing, these types of cost increases, we've seen with many of our 100-plus clients in Texas and Arkansas, how to deal with these rapid cost increases. However, one of the benefits of running a water and wastewater operation is that you tend to know these cost increases are coming well in advance. And that gives you the ability to implement a new financial plan in a manner that phases in inevitable cost and rate increases and therefore minimizes the impact on your ratepayers. One of the things I've learned in my many, many years of doing this is that ratepayers don't like big sudden increases. Nobody likes that. But if you gradually phase in the rate adjustments, that allows them to adjust their household budgets to meet the increasing needs. Well, since our last rate study, of course, there have been a lot of changes in the general economy. One thing that has happened is that you have continued to grow. Your account growth has been very much in line with what we forecast last year, and that's a benefit to the city. Many costs of a water system are fixed, so the more customers you have, the more people you have to spread those costs over. So robust growth is economically very beneficial for your water utility. Your operating expenses are increasing at a little higher pace. That's because of the fact that the general inflation rate is now 8.5%. That means the cost of everything is 8.5% greater, and that impacts your water utility as well. Thirdly, as was indicated earlier, the state of Arkansas passed a new law, State Law 605, which has dramatically increased the burden of doing rate plans and rate changes. There's a series of steps you now have to go through in order to get a rate plan implemented. That wasn't the case in the past. It is in the case now. It has also added some additional financial burdens to the utility. But of course, the most significant impact is the $45 million debt to fund the Ouachita project. That's the game changer here, and that's the primary reason why I'm here before you now. Okay. This chart right here is a depiction of your current and your forecast cost of providing water service. The bar chart is broken into several components. The blue section of the bar chart is your operating expenses. As you can see, they're going to go up every year, like I said, due to inflation and other factors. The red is the repair and replacement reserve that the State Law 605 is making you implement. The green portion is your current debt service, but the purple portion is the new debt service for the $45 million bond. You can see how that's kicking up your overall costs over the next 5 years. It's costing you a little bit less than $20 million to run your water utility right now. It's going to cost you $25+ million by the year 2027. So how do we pay for it? Well, very simple. Because of the fact that over the last several years, the city has made a series of rate adjustments that have enabled your utility to be in very good financial condition. Because of that, the impact of this additional debt is, we hope, fairly minimal. We're going to recommend that in effective January 2023, you do a $2 per month increase in your base residential charge. And the vast majority of your residential customers have a 5/8 inch meter. So their base charge would go up by $2. If you have a larger meter, then it would go up by the same proportionate amount of the same percentage increase that the $2 increase is on the 5/8 inch meter. We also recommend that you continue the rate plan of 3% increases in your volumetric rate in January. In November of 2023, we recommend that you do the same thing. Another $2 increase in your 5/8 inch meter and another 3% increase in your volumetric rate. Beyond that, in all likelihood, our forecast indicates that you're going to probably need to continue to do 3% annual increases in 2025 and beyond. That's basically what you've done in the past, and you're going to have to continue to do that. It might be a little higher if the inflation rate continues to be as high as it is, but right now we're banking that that the inflation rate is going to go back down to a manageable level. So this chart right here just is the depiction of the rate itself. As you can see, for your residential ratepayers, right now they pay a minimum charge or a base charge of $13.39. That would increase to $15.39 effective in January. It would increase to $17.39 effective in November. And then in 2025 and beyond, the increase would be much less, probably about 40 to 50 cents. And then the volumetric rate would go up by 3% each year. So what does this mean in terms of what ratepayers would pay? Well, the average residential customer here in the city of Hot Springs uses somewhere around 5,000 gallons of water service a month. Now that's an average. Some people use more, other people use less. But the majority, I would estimate that about 70% of your monthly bills are going to be 5,000 gallons or less. So if you're a 5,000 gallon user right now for water service, you pay $25.09 a month. That bill would go up by $2.35. $2 for the base charge and 35 cents for the volumetric charge. It would go up by a similar amount in November of 2023 of $2.36. But in the years after that, it would go up by less than $1 a month per year. Of course, if you use greater amounts of water, like 10,000 gallons or 20,000 gallons, the increase would be a little bit more. But the vast majority of ratepayers would see about a $2 to $3 a month increase for each of the next 2 years under this rate plan. And the forecast is beyond that, the increase would be about $1 to $2 a month. If you're a commercial business, your bill would go up by a little bit more because chances are you've got a larger meter and you use a little bit more water. But the average commercial business would probably pay between $14 and $17 a month more in January under this plan. This chart right here is just a depiction of the forecast revenues and expenses under this proposed rate plan. What's important to show here is that it does show that if you adopt this rate plan, we are forecasting that you will have sufficient revenues to pay your debt service and to meet your debt coverage requirements. There's also a little bit of a contingency there, because whenever you do rate planning and whenever you do financial planning, it's always good to leave a little bit of a contingency balance in case of unexpected expenses. That means that if interest rates kick up a little bit more in the next few weeks before this deal closes, I project that unless it's a catastrophic increase, I project that this rate plan will be sufficient to cover any of those increases as well. And then finally, I just want to wrap this up by reemphasizing a point that Mr. Burrow made a little earlier. Your water rates are very competitive when you compare them to other utilities here in Arkansas. This chart right here is a depiction of the monthly charge for 5,000 gallons of water service in the city of Hot Springs compared to many of your neighbors here in the state. Under this plan, as you can see, you're a little bit higher than some, and you're a little bit lower than others. In other words, you're right about where you would expect them to be. What's notable is that you're significantly below the state median. Right now, you pay $25.09 for 5,000 gallons of water service. The state median is $39.05. So you're $14 below the state median. And another thing to keep in mind is that it's very difficult to compare rates between cities, because always keep this in mind when you do rate comparisons. Some cities have extraordinarily low rates, but they have low rates because they're not putting any money into their system. They're not doing any capital investment. They're not securing water resources for the future like you are here in Hot Springs. So yeah, it's sort of like saying I could save $100 by not changing the oil in my car. Hey, you could do that, but a year later your engine is going to break down. So the proper financial policy is to balance the desire to keep rates as low as possible with the need to invest in your system to ensure that you provide a good quality of service. And in my last chart here, this is just a depiction of how your rates compare to all the utilities in the state of Arkansas. You are around the 20th percentile of rates in Arkansas, which means 80% of the utilities in this state charge a higher rate than you do. And you are getting a $45 million investment on top of the Ouachita project that will secure water for the future of the city. So I strongly recommend that you seriously consider and adopt this rate plan for the future of the city. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Director Garcia?
Thank you, Mayor. We looked at the slide with the inside the city customers. We have a number of customers outside the city. Was there a rate page for them? Because they're our customers too.
Yes, ma'am. They would pay a slightly higher rate. They pay 1.5 times, 1.5 times what the city customers pay, which is common. Literally thousands of cities do that around the United States. It's very accepted in rate-making methodology. And so they would pay a slightly higher rate under this plan.
But we don't have a slide on
No,
that.
I just, you know,
Or
you always
that
try to
rate.
balance how many
Yeah.
numbers you want to throw
Sure.
out at a presentation like this. And I just put a little note at the bottom that said higher adjustments for outside city ratepayers.
I saw that. But I may have missed it. What did you use for a number of customers increase?
Mr. Lane, do you remember that off the top of your head? If I recall, about 250 a year? 1% a year? It was about, yeah, about 150 to 200 new accounts per year.
And you had that separated between the outside rates and inside city
Yes.
rates for this revenue total?
That's correct. That's what our model does.
And you, in these comparisons, this is for our water charges only, and that's what you've studied. You haven't looked at the wastewater rates at this time?
We do wastewater rate recommendations for the city every year. And yes, we have looked at them in the past. It just was not a portion or.
That's what I mean.
Right.
This time, you've only looked at the water. You
Right.
haven't looked at wastewater, because when we get our bill, it's got our water and our wastewater and,
Yes,
the
it does.
other fees for our total bill that can
Right.
add up to a lot more than this amount.
That's right. That's why we wanted to emphasize what the impact on the water users were. I mean, like every other city, your monthly utility bill is going to include water, wastewater, sanitation, stormwater, and all other city services. But that's we wanted to emphasize that the $2 increase only applies to the water portion. Doesn't apply to any other portion of the bill.
Thank you.
Dan, I do think though in your prior models, when we look at wastewater, we're very transparent that our wastewater is very high. It's one of the highest in the state, not the highest, but we're up in the upper echelon in the percentiles. That's because of the investment we've made in our wastewater system. You know, we spent over about $90 million in the last decade, and we've got another $45 million that we're working on now. Actually about $65 million, because we had that $17 million that came in on a refi. But when you look at the blend of the two, when you look at water and wastewater, we're still right there in about the 55% percentile in the state. We're right there in the median. Maybe just a tad over, but we're right in the median, about 55 the last time I looked at that.
Yeah.
But we also have, stormwater and solid waste. So when our residents inside the city get that utility bill, they're paying for 4 utilities. So when you look at that and you try to compare that to somebody in Nevada or somebody in Fort Smith, they may not have 4 utilities on one bill. So I'm glad you pointed that out, because it's important to note that our utility bill is for multiple utilities, not just water, not wastewater, but solid waste and for stormwater.
Dan, there's 2 numbers that, drive revenue for the water utility, and that's obviously the base rate and then the volume rate. I guess you look to the base rate because it's a given, and the bond instrument, those who are issuing the bonds, want that security of the base rate, or do you see communities doing something different with the volume rate and not so much the base rate?
Cities that have large bond obligations like yours, I tend to recommend that they put the increase in the base rate because it's a guaranteed source of revenue. If you put it in the volumetric rate, the risk you're taking is that if there's a heavy rainfall year, that's great, good for the community, but not particularly good for water revenues. And so you run the risk of having revenue shortfalls. But if you have it in the base rate, it's guaranteed, and it will assure that your debt services coverage requirements are met and your debt service is paid.
Thank you. Director Trustee?
Thank you. Can you back up a slide or 2 to where you project the next one, go back, right there, page 7. This is forecast through 2027 of total revenues, operating expenses, and net expenses for debt service. These debt service coverage ratios on line 18 are much different than, Bob, what you have. Can you reconcile those for me? So either of you.
Yeah. I do it more from a financial analyst viewpoint, making sure that a debt coverage level of at least 1.25 is always made, because our rate model doesn't factor in the maximum annual debt service to the extent that that is required by financial advisors, because the maximum annual debt service is not necessarily the financial obligation that's needed in a given year. So I calculate coverage a little bit differently, but at the same time, Mr. Wright and I work together to assure that the revenues will meet all the bond covenant requirements that he examines as well.
And that's a good question, because I knew that you're seeing 2 different things, and to try to reconcile that, it's cash and accrual basis, and you can see that on what he is presenting in the slideshow, he's got the transfers, he's got the repair and refurbishment, he's got some of these line items that when and we've done this in the past, that we'll take his study and he'll format it to what I presented to you, which is what we actually provide into the offering documents, which is more what the investing public is looking at. So it is a different view as to how he is working this. Ultimately, his numbers, when formatted into ours, it looks our way. That's what we'll present out to the public.
Okay.
Which is more conservative. It's not 150 coverage, what he's showing right here. The
150 to
true actuality
163,
is different.
Yeah, this is really more of a benchmark. It's to indicate when you're doing rate analysis, whether or not the rates basically are going to be sufficient before they're turned over to the financial advisor. That's why I do that calculation.
Okay. And so cash balances projected increase
Mhm.
$3.5 million
Yes, sir.
over through 2027.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what we're forecasting?
That's what we're forecasting if everything goes according to plan.
Well, that always happens.
But we have the net revenues number, line 16. It's really a contingency balance, because what that
Right.
you always want to recover a little bit more than you need in case there's an unexpected expense.
Sure.
The classic example being if interest rates go up again before closing. That's why you build that a little bit extra. And if that doesn't happen, then theoretically, you might actually increase your cash balance. But that also gives you the option at a later date to maybe scale back some of the future rate adjustments if you're over recovering in terms of cash balances.
Or pay off some of the debt.
That too.
At that
Mhm.
point.
That's the beauty of running a utility, is that all the money you collect is going to, in one way or another, go right back into the system to serve your ratepayers. You're not profiting off of this. What you're doing is you are investing in the future of your utility.
Any additional questions? Anything with Mr. Bowman?
Ryan, do you have any questions or anything that you'd want to add?
I do not, unless there are questions from the board.
Well, I had
Director
some
Garcia, go
questions
ahead.
before we adjourn. I don't know who they would be directed to, but I have some questions.
That's fine, we're not going anywhere. Just wanted to
Okay.
make sure that we knew that Ryan was on Zoom and had an opportunity to offer comment. So if there's no more questions of Bob or Dan or Ryan, we can talk amongst ourselves. Director Garcia?
Thank you, Mayor. One of the concerns is, like right now, we did have a bond issue for our wastewater, and we're under ADEQ consent order where we're required to make corrections and take care of this consent agenda order items. Well, how much more are we going to have to issue to address those deficiencies?
You know, that's a good question. We got an increase today, 6% on our flat pumps, just as an example. The longer we wait to do anything, the more it's going to cost. But right now, we meet constantly looking at these and shifting these projects and the numbers. We're never going to get through with maintenance of our system. It's just too large and expensive. One of the promising things is we have fully rehabbed the Fairwood and the Stokes force mains. We've done the same, or we're doing the same in Gulfa, so that's our 3 basins. We've got projects out there now that we're working on to satisfy the consent administrative order. We also have quite a bit of work that we're doing at the plant. So as we move through this, we believe that 45 is at least going to get us to the point to where we should be released from the CAO. That's going to take us out several years. But, you know, in the future, as we see additional volumes come, we may need more money to do that. But I think what we'll see over these next few years, because we are at that high point of our wastewater rates, I think we're going to see other communities as they're falling under their CAOs. One city, you know, has a $500 million project for their wastewater. Mm-hmm. But as we see these things happening, we're going to see other communities have to take care of their systems. That's, and part of Act 605 is going to force those in their water utilities and utilities to do this. So we'll see other communities start coming up to that rate. But to answer that question, we've got a good master plan in place for the wastewater system. We know that we'll need additional money in 10 to 20 years. But we're making every dollar that we have stretch as far as we can. But again, we're in this kind of a weird phase of increases. You know, there are things that are beyond our control. But what we know today, we know that we're going to get at least Gulfa completed and most of the projects at the plant. I don't foresee us coming back asking for additional wastewater money in the near future.
So in the near future, is that like in the next 2 to 3 years?
I would say 5 to 10.
Oh, okay.
You know, hopefully. And again, that really depends on what we see from these manufacturers. If we continue to bid out projects that are coming in with these higher costs, we're going to have to evaluate that because we don't know until we bid the projects out. We have a good estimate, but again, we had great estimates 2 years ago that would have completed everything we're doing, and we're before you tonight needing another $45 million.
Well, I mean, the supply chain issues from the pandemics worldwide, that's not just Arkansas, it's the entire country.
Yeah.
And the other countries. That was something that no one could foresee. But I just, as we look at rates, it's very important for me to understand what the total increase could be the coming year, if there's any additional money known needed for wastewater too.
We know that we'll need additional monies further out. That tells us that in our master plan. But for the next 3, 5, 7 years, I don't think we will. We're going to stretch the dollars as far as we can. We also have, our operating monies that we have a CIP plan in our operating budget. And so we may have to move some of those over to accomplish a couple of things that get us completely out of the CAO. But we're aware of those. We're watching those money. Our debt service and wastewater is pretty high on the operating side for the next couple of years. But in 25, we should start seeing some of that release that we can put into the capital projects too. We've
got the monies that we go into the reserve for
Yes.
capital replacement.
Yes.
Bill, there's one other point, while we were talking about wastewater, as the water system grows, as we spend money growing the water system, we have a corresponding growth in sewer. wastewater.
Right.
So the revenues will come up in solid waste, at the same rate that they go up in water.
And as you kind of look at that crystal ball, I think one thing that sometimes we may not fully see is we see other states, cities, communities not have the ability to increase the amount of water supply they have. I mean, we see droughts happening that are drying up cities in several areas of the country. Cities that have an abundance of resources like we have, once we accomplish this goal, we're going to see commercial and residential growth, in my opinion, going to be much more than what we're forecasting. So additional revenues on top of what we're forecasting, I think we'll see that. The only thing that's different is weather.
Yeah, I've heard that from realtors, from inquiries, because our water access is getting, news is making the rounds in all the states. I understood that the ANRC and the Western Planning District had some loans available. I'm interested in knowing if there's a way to reduce the amount of bonds required, if we have any other sources to make up some of the funds that might be needed. Is there any information on other sources from those two?
We have applied for several grants. We've got about 7 projects. I think we have 5 wastewater Monty, is it 5 wastewater projects? That we've applied for $5 million on each one of those. We don't know if we're going to get those, so we can't really look at that.
But that, I'm talking about for water.
Water, we have 2 that we've applied for, and hopefully we'll see some of those. But I'll be honest with you, I don't feel comfortable with those because of what we've heard over the 2 years that brought Act 605 to be. I think we're going to see those monies, and it's ARPA funds. We're probably going to see those in southeast, southwest Arkansas, in areas where, as Mr. Wright mentioned, these areas that haven't done what they needed to do to protect their system and build upon their system, they have no funds to do it now. So I think we're going to see those monies go that way. I don't know that, but that's my feeling. I think there is an opportunity to try to go to ANRC and borrow money, but that process is so long that we're not going to be able to meet what
The
we currently
timeline?
have with our projects. We're already on the bubble on whether we're going to be able to meet the 3 years on several of them.
It's my understanding that the water that we have, the amount of water we have access to the Lake Hamilton, we can obtain more water once we have a redundant system in place, which when this project's finished, we'll have water from Lake Hamilton, Lake Washita, and ability to obtain additional water from DeGray if needed. I mean, from Lake Hamilton if needed.
We can request it. That's what we were told in 2004.
Right.
But keep in mind, though, we would have to build an additional plant or expand our current plant. So we would have to come back in with a whole new capital project to use any more of that Lake Hamilton water. Our plant is at capacity on what we're able to draw out of Hamilton. We do have a subsequent line that comes out of Washita that does give us redundancy. Should something happen in Hamilton, we'll be able to bring this Washita water once it's complete into the
But-
Washita plant as well. But to produce more water in the Washita plant, it's going to take a substantial expansion. And Monty, I'm not sure we have enough property out there to get there. But
But what about the new plant? They wouldn't.
the new plant we've built on a footprint that we could build a second plant right next to it, which would have some cost, but nothing of what we're looking at
Right.
today, because it wouldn't have the intake and the other water lines. The water lines that we put in the ground for the potable water will be large enough to accommodate that second plant when that time comes.
With the addition, with our total water rights from current rights from Lake Hamilton and from Washita, do we need to retain the rights at DeGray? Can those be sold and bring money in?
They could be returned to CAW at the same cost that we paid for it. So,
But I thought the agreement said the remainder of, they had it to the remainder of rights.
they have the
at
right of first
DeGray.
refusal.
Yes.
But is that still in there? I thought these,
Yes.
what
Have a
you
right-
sent us said that,
They have a right of first refusal.
first refusal. But they're gonna, we would get that money back.
We'd essentially get our money back.
And what we pay annually for storage, or is that separate?
That would be saved if we canceled our rights. You would save that each year.
So
I don't know. I mean,
there's a time period when you have to have those payments, and that's why you'll see in this document, I think it was 2046, that you don't see that MAWA payment anymore. That MAWA, we have it listed as an obligation, as a loan, but really that's our annual payment for the water storage. We've paid that. We don't have that any longer on DeGray.
So it's been paid in full already. We won't
Correct.
have that.
Correct.
Coming up.
But I would say that that's a tremendous asset to have moving forward. It's better than oil.
Well, what we were talking about there, is that the $1 million we paid in front or in advance, or, and then what the storage is, like 25,000 a year, or what?
Yes, yes. CAW has made those payments up until the date that we entered into the agreement, so we paid them back what they paid up to that point, and then we assumed those annual payments, but I want to say those ended in 20.
Yeah, because
So now we have that
we've had
water.
that for
My
almost
point
10
is,
years.
preserving our rights really isn't costing us
No.
today.
No.
And my last question, this 45 million would be deposited into December. But I would, I don't know what the cash requirements going forward of that is. And I would want us to have an investment committee from the board to oversee this.
The ordinance itself will set the parameters for any investments.
Again, I still recommend a board oversight that includes an investment committee.
Duly noted.
I think what's the build out of, what is the time frame on the use of funds?
We have a drawdown schedule. You know, right now, I mean, we're gonna use most of that in a fairly short amount of time over the next 2 years, probably over the next 3 for sure. So, I mean, some of that can be invested,
You'd have to be really cautious with that,
exactly.
because you're gonna have interest rates come down within that period of time.
I wouldn't do anything other than treasury, but,
Well, they're all susceptible to
well, they are.
a reduction.
But we have a drawdown schedule that will tell us when we need those funds at what time. You know, we've got a plant that we've started that, you know, half of what we're asking for is gonna go directly to that project. Of course, we won't pay it all until they're complete. They're not gonna be complete with it for probably another 2.5 years, maybe up closer to 3. As we continue to push these things out, it just takes it out longer, because these contractors that we're using, you know, they're obligated in a lot of places.
I understand what Director Garcia is saying, and to have board oversight is great, you know. I shouldn't infer that she's thinking that we need to invest in
No,
interest
not at all.
sensitive instruments, so.
But I
'cause
think
that-
we need to
You gotta
know
preserve
what
your
is-
principal, given the short time frame you're gonna use your money. Director Trustee.
Thank you. A question for Karen. Do we have one-year investments that are paying 3 or 4%?
I'm sorry, what?
Do we have one-year investments right now that are paying 3 or 4%? I mean, Bob mentioned that earlier.
3%?
3%?
Not right now.
No, we don't. So,
well, banks
Bob?
are offering 4.25% right now in town, local banks.
but it gets back to your point, Pat, I think, about if we don't have our money invested at those rates, does it make sense to pay off that
Yeah,
2010A bond issue out of cash and save the refinancing cost of, I think you said 375 roughly?
And the interest, and you're right, we can look at it, we can look at some of the assets that you're invested in right now as compared, you know, if you have sub 1% still
Right.
investments, then that would make sense. It's just right now that, you know, with everything that is coming in and the ability to invest now is much greater than that 1% you're paying on that loan.
Hey,
So
Bob.
that's- Karen and I can get together and kind of look and see.
Ryan can't hear anything unless we're on the microphone, just so everybody's aware.
And I will add that since we're not pricing the bonds for a month, that will give us ample time that we can sit and look individually at, all right, here are some of the monies that the city has available. Here's what they're earning, and just compare it to what that 1%, because you could save the interest, not only the cost of issuance, but the interest on that 3.4 million. But we just need to see what,
Right.
we've got some time to do that.
And I think we
Well,
should look at that.
Can I add something, please?
Certainly.
The ordinance that will be considered by the board next Tuesday night does currently contemplate the refunding of the 2010A bond. If the board's decision is to not refund the 2010A bond with bond proceeds, then that decision needs to be made before the bond ordinance is adopted next Tuesday night. So even though we're not offering the bonds until December, the ordinance to be approved by the board next week will authorize the refunding of the 2010A unless revisions are made.
And Karen and I will be getting together much quicker than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ryan, this is Steve Trustee. Even though it authorizes that refinance, does it require the refinancing?
It does if it's in the ordinance, yes, sir.
Okay. I didn't know if it was just authority to do so, if it made sense to us. And last item, Bob, doesn't the Fed meet again? Won't they meet again in December?
December.
Mm-hmm. So there's potential for one more rate increase.
2 more. They'll do
Before year
it.
end, they meet once.
No, not from us, I mean from the Fed. And-
Bill,
and
what is
rates in general.
What is the permitted use of the ARPA funds? Is there any ability to use those funds to
If the board
take
so,
care of the
if the,
2010?
if the board so choose, the ARPA funds, that is an eligible expense.
I mean, I don't want to, you don't have your documents here, but, you know, retiring debt is an eligible use of funds?
We have, our funds are unrestricted at this point. We can spend those for any lawful authorized use.
We've already covered the restricted.
Any lawful government
Okay.
expense.
Yeah, and the refunding of the 2010A bond would have to occur, even if you used ARPA funds or other city funds. That payoff would have to occur before December the 29th. Otherwise, back to Mr. Wright's point, we would be subordinate to that loan for a period of time. So it's important that that loan go away from bond proceeds or otherwise at or before December the 29th, the date of our bond closing.
Yeah, if we did that, I don't necessarily see a significant alteration in the $2 base increase or.
Dan, you might want to talk, but I don't think refunding that's going to have an impact on this rate increase. We're going to need the 2 and
No,
2.
it wouldn't impact the rate plan at all.
But it's still something to look at, maybe in the next couple days. We don't have a lot of time because we're meeting on Wednesday this week and our next meeting's Tuesday.
Tuesday.
so-
City's closed Friday.
Pardon?
City offices are closed Friday.
No. That's right. Director Garcia.
Mayor, it's very disappointing that the new Water Act required any increases instead of being able to bring it out over additional time periods instead of having it done all in 1 year. Because in the past, these were spread out and it was less painful at one time. So I don't know if our legislators would be open to it, but I would sure like to see a change in when they go back into session this coming year, if they would relook at that. Because if the intent was to help ratepayers, as was brought out, this is causing more pain to all the ratepayers. So I would be in favor of at least talking to our representatives about that.
Very good. Any other questions of the board? Comments? Any closing comments, Bill?
I just want to make sure that staff is clear on the board expectations leaving tonight.
Well, I think the conversation really is focused on borrowing only what we need. If there's an alternate use of funds that would make a material difference in the rate increases, that ought to be brought forward. Given the discussion this evening, it doesn't appear that we have any, even paying off the 2010A doesn't have really a material impact on the rate increases. So so some of our options we're somewhat without options if we want to build out the plan as in distribution as designed and contemplated.
I will say that we have had this team, we have looked at this almost any way that you can before we came tonight, and really it came back to what our financial advisor, presented to you tonight. We've looked at really all of these options. We'll look at them again. I mean, I have no issue with that. If we can make something happen, we certainly will. But as you look at that long term, I don't think there's anything we can really do unless we really escalated rates to become non-subordinate to the 2010A, and it's a matter of how we pay that off. But if that was not present, because prior to finding out that it would not be subordinate, we were still moving forward, and it was still a $2 in January and a $2 in January of '24, but we couldn't get there. We had to move it to November, but that did not change materially anything in the package.
Well, when we funded the different aspects of the new water system, you know, the timing of the need for funds was contemplated, and the borrowing was coincided with the need for funds. This expenditure is in such a tight window, and that's what was leading to my question of how tight was that window, and is there an opportunity to only do a portion of the needs and then come back with the balance, and with a 3-year build out. That's a pretty tight window.
And the fact that for us to be able to let the bids for any of these projects, we have to have that certificate of availability. We have to know that we have the funds to be able to bid it out, to award it. Even though the work's gonna take a period of time and the drawdown schedule's gonna be different, we have to know we have it on the front end to be able to let it. And I do want to say that Matt Dunn with Christ has supplied a drawdown schedule to all of the individuals, and that was taken in consideration as they put this bond ordinance together. And Ryan, I think you've had a lot of conversations with Matt.
That's correct.
Director Garcia.
Just so I'm clear, what, if we did not include, the 210A in this, total amount, how much, cost would that save?
Well, we just kind of mentioned that.
Because we wouldn't have to pay this additional, wasn't there additional amount associated with that besides the payoff?
There is the annual principal and interest on that A&RC loan. I'd have to pull up my other file. It's roughly $350,000 a year. So if we came up with the $3.4 million in cash and paid that off, that would lower your annual mortgage lower by that amount. So it certainly would have an impact. It doesn't impact, as Mr. Burrows said, it doesn't impact the rate increase we need. It would save you interest over time. It's just, you know, when we look at all that, so many times cash is king on just about every city and system we work with. So to come in and say, use your cash to pay this off, we look at all alternate ways. Hey, here's what's the best as far as taking care of all the needs. But I think we can get together tomorrow and just look and see, all right, where would the city be able to draw $3.4 million from? And what is that money invested in at what kind of rate? You know, Leanne was just showing me some of the guaranteed investment contracts, you know, treasuries and such, and told me about a rate that she got for a client today of 4.19% for.
It was a T-bill maturing in February.
Wow.
You know, these short-term rates are pretty ridiculous. I mean, it's an inverted yield curve. So that's why I was saying that, you know, your ability to take some of these monies that the city has, this 3.4, maybe it's not invested right now because it's locked into something that was bought earlier, but your ability to take that and invest in 3.5%, 4% short-term conservative, you know, versus paying off, you know, 3.5%, whatever it is on the new, you know, that's what we just need to look and see what's the best approach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there's a desire to do some additional analysis on how to treat the 2010A, Ryan, this is not fair to you, but would it be possible for you to bring for our agenda an option A and an option B?
I can certainly do that.
I like that.
Contemplating that if the refunding is not accomplished with the proceeds of the bond, then the city would use other funds to retire that loan prior to December 29th, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I can certainly do that.
You're good, brother.
Director Trustee, something on your mind?
There is. Bob? Sorry. The A&RC, you said you've had several back and forth with them. And the decision is it has to be paid off? Or it'll subordinate everything?
It's,
The new
the way the language reads, and Ryan can jump in if he needs, but the way the language on the 2010A reads that, again, they're subordinate right now, but the only way for us to issue additional debt, we have to meet a 120% test based on a number that's not for 3 or 4 years, that 11.7 million. They have looked at that in 2020 and 2021 when we did not meet that, and they agreed, we see what you're doing, you're phasing it in, we'll remain subordinate. The way they're looking at it now is, and I think 605 drives a lot of this, is that, hey, you do not meet that 120% test. We might can internally look through this. We might can come to the conclusion, that we would stay subordinate, but there's no time frame on when they could do that, and we don't have the luxury to wait. Unfortunately, we have to get all this done. So it forces really two options: either leave it outstanding, and if that's the case, then this new $45 million deal is subordinate to all of the other public debt. So you're talking another 10 or 15 basis points borrowing cost on $45 million, versus the other option is pay off that 2010A and take that cost. And that's what we weighed against. But we did not look at the option of take city cash and pay it off. That's the third thing that we will bring back next week. And that's what Karen and I and Bill and others will look at and see. It's so we can present to you prior to the meeting. Here are the actual numbers to that.
Bob, is ARNC, are they, I guess, are they, when they do that and it's subordinate up until they decide it's not subordinate, is there a reason they think there's higher risk, or what? They
And
want
part of this
money
back and forth-
to loan to other projects, or what?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, because part of the back and forth that we've had with them is, they're wanting to go out and do additional borrowing to loan out, in the future. And they think that if we have a subordinate loan, that we offer up subordination on Hot Springs, that it puts us at additional risk. We might need to carve that name out of our portfolio. And I argued back to them, is like, you want the city of Hot Springs in your portfolio as an asset versus some of our rural friends in Arkansas. That's a name that is widely traded, it's widely known. It would have no adverse impact on ANRC going forward on their borrowing capacity at all. In my opinion, I do this quite a bit. So, but it's internally, they're just looking, if we, this is my interpretation, if we make do something for Hot Springs, does it force our hand to have to do that for other people to come and ask for subordination? I don't know. I would think that the Hot Springs 2010 is one of the few subordinate loans that they have. So I argued back with them, this doesn't open up Pandora's box that Fort Smith is going to come and ask for a subordinate loan or anything like that. But I think they just take the position as, you don't meet the coverage, you don't meet the test that's in our legal language. You're asking us to take a position that in their opinion puts more risk on them. So, and we tried to argue, but you're in the business to help the ratepayers of Arkansas, and this helps the ratepayers of Arkansas significantly. We couldn't quite get there.
Very good.
Is there an appeal of that decision?
If we had the luxury of time, sure.
But not in this window.
Yeah, and that's what we're faced with, is because the interest rate chart I showed you, because inflation at 8-9%, the cost of this project, the $45 million, continues to go. So if those two continue to go up, this smaller issue of $3 million that we're chasing, trying to fix, could get eaten up significantly by cost overruns and interest rate overruns.
And there's also the issue of wanting to close on the bonds with audited accounts.
I mean,
2020
ANRC's in a
2021
position of they want to loan their money.
Yep.
I think 605 has really made it difficult for cities moving forward to be able to go to the bond market versus ANRC. But they're also the agency that's going to find you in fiscal distress.
605 changed them from essentially an economic development agency to a regulatory one.
And they love that. That's my opinion, but.
Well, I think we had an excellent discussion here this evening, and this is all been recorded, right? So
Yes, sir.
it's available somehow. Do we ever put this kind of discussion on our city website?
I don't believe so. I'm not sure. I'd have to check to see if we could even do that, but it is foyable. Anybody's welcome to it.
Yeah, I think it's almost a master's level course in debt financing. So,
I appreciate all the work that Bob and Dan and Ryan, I mean,
Absolutely.
Karen, I mean, we've worked pretty hard on this, and just appreciate all the back and forth we've done. I think, Bob, this may be the 8th time you had to, or Dan, you had to, about the 8th time you had to run this model for us in different scenarios, and it's been a lot of work, so thank you.
I know Dan's report was on our screen. Can we get that email to us,
Certainly,
please?
certainly.
Will it be in the packet? Could it be in the packet next week?
Can be, certainly.
I'll do it both, but I'd like to look
Yeah,
at
by
it
the
in
email.
advance.
We'll send it to you.
All right.
Thank you. Anything else? This work session was specific to this issue, so it's really dark outside.
Yeah.
So be careful,
change
especially those
kills
of you who traveled from Little Rock or further beyond. So we are adjourned. What?
Well,
We got something else?
we're really, unless we call a meeting, we won't be back together. So, I mean, we'll keep the 2 items on the agenda. If there's changes, we'll bring them that night.
Yeah,
Well,
he's-
there's
we'll,
some-
we'll
He's
we'll
bringing
put
an A
option,
and
we'll
B.
put option A and
Okay.
option B on the agenda.
Right.
And
Okay.
that evening, you can start talking about one option, and if you don't like it, you can vote it down or table it to see what happens on the next one. There's ways to do it.
Okay.
Well, and we know that Bob and Karen are going to be working together and looking at some things really quick here, probably within the next 24 hours, and that may tell us right then what direction we're going to go. So it probably won't be a difficult decision based upon the new information we receive. So, very good. Thank you all. Be safe.
My-